Hi there, my name is David. I'm a psychologist and a therapist, and I'd like to thank Wexford Library for inviting me to a series of talks here, the Parenting Today 2020 seminars. And today I'm going to tell you about procrastination, or more specifically, academic procrastination. So the title of this course is Academic Procrastination, Solutions and Support for Your Teenager Who Can't Study. Now, my hope for this short talk here is that you're going to leave today with 3 real takeaway actionable strategies that hopefully can help. So don't worry if you don't know what I'm talking about with academic procrastination. It's not a concept we talk about all that often. But I'm going to start off here by explaining exactly what I mean by academic procrastination, what it looks like, and as I said, giving you some strategies that hopefully will help. Now, if your teenager who is in school is already doing really well and they're flying and they're engaging with their study work and they're happy and they're feeling confident, well then this talk is, I guess maybe you might get something from this talk, but it's probably not why you're watching this. This is for anyone who is struggling and is looking for kind of some maybe alternative strategies that might be useful. So that's what we're going to get into here. So to begin with, I'm going to give you a very brief definition of academic procrastination. So it's a deliberate delay in a practical course of study or learning in spite of the expected deterioration. So deterioration is, or the person knows that they've been putting off their schoolwork and are aware that the delay in this is not helpful. So the deterioration in that is, I know in the long term this is not going to help me, but for some reason I keep doing it, I keep putting it off, I keep delaying it. So such procrastination may create unnecessary stress and anxiety for people when they attempt to complete their assignments with rush until the very last minute or the last deadline. So one of the main issues with this is it creates more stress than is necessary and it leads to a lot of anxiety. And also I'll talk about some self-esteem and confidence issues that come with this issue. So here's a little exercise, and because we have our definition of what academic procrastination is, what about what causes it? So one of the things and one of the issues I see some parents struggling with is they try to help their teenager with, coming up with a real specific plan and trying to kind of almost help them micromanage what they need to be doing on a daily basis in terms of study strategies, things like that. So you can ask your teenager a question like, if there was one specific action step you could take every day to be successful, what would it be? Now, I've asked that question to many young people, many students, and I've always been struck by the fact that they always have a good answer to that question, almost always at least. So examples of this are things like this. Well, if I did a little maths homework every night, instead of always leaving it until the night before it's due, this would definitely help me. Or if I did some technical graphics first, this would get me in the mood for study. I like that subject. If I consistently wrote a few hundred words a day, my essays would improve effortlessly. Another one is, if I started with my French homework, I'd get it out of the way. Then all the other work would seem easy and less daunting. Perhaps if I read half a chapter a night, I'd keep up with my reading. If I took notes from the book and highlighted the important sections, then I could use fun, crazy mental rhymes to help me remember the information and the order it comes in. So there are just a few examples of strategies people come up with. Okay, and this is called the methods approach. Okay, people are very good at coming up with these novel things. Now, the issue is, the real reason I'm highlighting this is, most students are kind of aware of what it is they need to do in order to improve. Procrastination is a slightly different issue. So it's not about not knowing where to start really, or what to do specifically, because many people do know what to do. It's just that they don't do it for some reason, and that's where procrastination comes in. And if we can understand what that block is to consistent engagement with the work, well then the procrastination goes away. So that's what we're going to get into here, is why does it happen? So procrastination is not caused by. So it's very important that we understand why it's not caused by, or what is not the cause of procrastination, because if we think we know and we're wrong about that, well then the advice we'll give or the support we give will be misguided. So there's a few very common ones that people will say they think are the causes of procrastination, and here they are. Well, it's just what I talked about before. They don't know the strategies enough. And as I've pointed out here already, that's often not the case. It's not a lack of knowledge. It's not a lack of planning. Because oftentimes I'll talk to students who are struggling with this, and they will say, I plan regularly, but I never implement the plan. Or I have these really good looking plans, and I just don't follow through with them. Now I'm going to talk a little later about much more helpful strategies in terms of planning. Of course, the big one is, why do you procrastinate? Oh, well, I'm lazy. And believe it or not, procrastination has nothing to do with laziness. I've seen some of the people in the past who have struggled with procrastination, and once they figured out the blocks to it, they're away. They really increased their productivity massively. So there's very, very little to do, if anything at all, with this label of laziness on it. Okay, it's not that. Another thing, and this is a little bit controversial maybe, because we often see this with procrastination. We see the young person playing video games when they should be doing their schoolwork or something. But the primary cause of this is not something like video games or distractions or social media or internet, anything like that. It's more to do with passively using those things. Okay, so I'm going to get into that a little bit more here in a moment. So that's not what it is. What are the real causes of procrastination? What is it that leads young people to struggle to engage regularly or consistently? Well, as I mentioned, it's passive recreation. So it's those things, those fun things that students like to do, like video games, TV watching, all those things. They're actually not the issue. It's passively engaging with them is the issue, and I'm going to explain that more as I go along here. Misguided planning. I'm going to give you a much better approach to planning here in this short video. Feelings of overwhelm are a big cause. It's basically the nervous system doesn't like to feel overwhelmed, and it will delay as much as it can if it feels overwhelmed. Anxiety is a big part of this, and also low confidence. And also the issue with low confidence is, low confidence leads to procrastination, but procrastination also reinforces low confidence. So it's really a great thing if we can get a handle on this, because the big problem with procrastination is, of course, it leads to underachievement. The young person doesn't fulfill their fullest potential. But also it's this low confidence and low self-esteem that comes from this. Okay, so the good news with all this is if a young person can understand why this happens and put much more effective strategies into place to overcome procrastination, not only will their schoolwork improve and their grades improve, they'll start to feel much better about themselves, and their confidence will really grow massively. So that's the exciting part about this. So what I thought I'd do is I'd give a sort of a generic example of a young person struggling with procrastination. So maybe as you watch this example, you might be nodding along and thinking to yourself, yeah, I recognize that. That's kind of maybe what my teenager's going through. See what you think of this example. Now I'm going to really break it down as to what's happening and why procrastination is happening for this young person here. So this person's called Lee, and Lee has come home from school, and Lee has a lot of schoolwork to do. So they've got homework and they've got study and everything else. Now Lee sits watching TV, and Lee is thinking, and there's a lot going on in Lee's mind in this example here. Lee actually, maybe he doesn't show it, but Lee actually feels quite overwhelmed. He's not really sure what's going on inside. And he's not really too sure what to do right now. It's as if he has a choice. Should he go and do some work, or should he continue to watch the TV show? So if we really slow this moment down here and kind of look at what's really happening on an emotional and psychological level for the student in this moment, we'll see this thing. This is the dynamic that I see all the time. It's kind of the two strategies we see for young people are they get caught between this thing I call the lazy mind and the bossy mind. Okay, so sure, we don't want to be lazy and we don't want that to drive our behavior, but the alternative we sometimes go to then to avoid that is the bossy mind. And the point of this is neither the bossy mind or the lazy mind are particularly helpful. And it's the fight between these two mindsets, if you like, or these two inner voices that causes this paralysis or this stuck feeling of not knowing what to do. Things that these minds might say, this mindset, just watch another episode, this voice tells Lee. Bossy mind chimes in, Lee, you're so lazy. Another one from the lazy mind, you have weeks left, there's no rush on this. Bossy mind, everyone else studies a lot more than you do. Lazy mind, it's only one day, there's no big deal in this. Bossy mind chimes in, you're a mile behind in your work. you can plan more later, it's fine. You're going to fail your exams if you don't get moving here. So what we're seeing is Lee is in the middle of this and he hears, look, I have all night to do this. Bossy mind chimes in, you don't have any time to relax. So he's kind of stuck and he's pulled between two different competing mindsets. And what we want to do is realize that there's an alternative to this. So we want to get out of this kind of lazy approach or the bossy approach, and we want to come up to something I call, try and teach people about, is the compassionate mind, which is a much more unified mindset. It's much more supportive self-talk. We're talking about much more respectful to yourself, much more encouraging, enjoyable, achievable. It is manageable, it's rewarding, it's caring for yourself. Self-care is a huge part of the solution in procrastination, and it's inspiring. So any strategies or approaches we take, those are the kind of things we're trying to cultivate for the young person. We're trying to really get them to develop self-respect. We're trying to encourage them as much as we can and see the work for intrinsic rewards, if you like. So now that we've talked about a few of the reasons for procrastination, as well as a few of the things that don't really explain what procrastination is, I'd like to give you 3 actionable strategies that you can start to use now, 3 kind of new mindsets that may be beneficial for anybody who is struggling with this issue of academic procrastination. So the first thing I'm going to talk about briefly is the type of language we want to cultivate for someone who has this issue. Because a lot of the self-talk, for instance, in procrastination can be unhelpful, to say the least. So some of the things we want to avoid, for instance, would be something like the term, I have to. And often we find ourselves even giving advice to people, we use this term, have to. The problem with this term of have to is that it automatically creates a resistance to doing that thing that we're going to do. I mean, ask yourself personally, even if you've those things in life that you feel you have to do, often it feels like we have to struggle and push ourselves to engage with those things. So another one is this thing of the reason I'm engaging with this is, well, because if I don't do it, I'm going to fail. And it's very fear-based. Another example is, well, I need to do well, or I won't get the points I need for my course, or my parents will be disappointed, or I really don't want to be a failure with this. These are the sort of motivators that often someone with procrastination will have. So we want to change the reason why we're taking action towards the goal in the first place, and much more intrinsically motivated than extrinsically motivated. So better types of language are to cultivate this idea that it's a choice. You're making a choice to do this, and I choose to is much more helpful than I have to. I can achieve success for myself. I enjoy making progress. I think that this course would be really good for me. I deserve to have success. I can have success. I'm choosing it for myself. So it's just to cultivate that type of language. And even also when we're giving advice to people is to use this type of language to encourage that, to get away from this have to mentality. Because that's really that bossy mindset we talked about, is have to, pushing all the time. So of course, the academic work is an important life goal for a young person. But we want to start to use much more beneficial, much more encouraging language if we can at all. So that's the first of the 3, just to keep that in mind. Now the second one I'm going to spend a little bit longer here talking about, and this is the whole thing about planning schoolwork. Planning schoolwork is important, but a lot of young people that have this issue of procrastination, they will often say things like, sometimes I feel like I spend more time planning my work than actually doing it. So what I'm going to show you here is, and you might get a bit of a laugh out of this, it is what I call the good intentions study plan. So as we know, good intentions don't always translate into action. But an example of it, I'm just going to take an example, maybe a young person comes home at 6 p.m. and they have the evening to potentially do some work. So what they do is they look at their timetable. Those are the hours they have available, broken into half-hour blocks. And they'll sit down and say, okay, look, I have to you do some academic work, some study, some homework. So they say to themselves, I'm going to schedule it in here. So they're going to say from 6 to 8, I'm going to do 2 hours of work, take a break, and then from 9 to 10, I'm going to do some study. Now, I want you to just look at that for a moment and see if you can think of any problems with that, because there is a slight problem with that approach there. The problem with it is, when you look at that, it's not very motivating, because all you can see when you look at that plan is study, 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 study. Now, remember, if we're trying to avoid feeling overwhelmed and trying to avoid stress and anxiety, which is a part of what causes procrastination, we want to avoid this, because the reality of what happens if this is the approach, and I've seen this so many times with young people, is actually, this is the reality of it. 6 p.m. comes and they say, well, I think I'll just watch another episode of my TV show. 7 o'clock comes around and they're having a fight with mom or dad. Then they're online for a while, they get a bit hungry to eat something, they go back online again. 9:30, well, I'll have a shower, then I'll start, but they're browsing Facebook again. Maybe around 10:30, they realize, I'll probably get in a bit of trouble tomorrow if I don't do this homework, so they'll do some fearful rush study. And then they feel really tired, and then it's, I'll plan for tomorrow. So it's this thing of making this really sort of ambitious, huge, overwhelming plan to study, 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 failing to follow through with it, and then planning to plan again, okay, making more elaborate plans. So my point here is often that plans are somewhat overrated. We do need plans, but there's a much more helpful approach to take when you're making plans. And the biggest part of it is that when you look at the plan, it's something that motivates you. Okay, it makes you feel like, study is important, but it's not taking over my life. It's not going to monopolize my life. And I have plenty of time for myself. I have plenty of time to do things that I find enjoyable. And really what I'm saying is the young person starts to take their recreational time much more seriously, because the problem with procrastination is that they engage with the recreational, the fun activities, but they do it so passively. I'll often say something to them like, what are your intentions for study today? And the young person might say something like, yeah, I'm going to get around to it now later on. I'll ask them, what are your intentions for recreation or fun this evening? And they'll say things like, oh, I have no time for that. Or maybe they'll say, yeah, I might do something later on. But they're not really sure about it. They're not really clear in their mind about having recreational time blocked in or scheduled in, which is what I'm going to talk about in a moment. And that is a huge, huge help in terms of overcoming procrastination. So a different approach, this is just an example, okay? It could look something like you're scheduling in enjoyable things for yourself in the evening. And we can encourage young people to do this when we're talking with them. Now, this is just an example. Whatever it is for each individual person will be different. But now there are times around that recreational time in which the young person can then engage with study. But when they look at this is called unscheduling. Dr. Neil Fiore talks about this in his book, The Now Habit, for instance. And it's a really good one. I'd highly recommend it. But the young person schedules in their schoolwork, their study work around this, so that they don't have this sense of being that their recreation is going to be jeopardized by their schoolwork. So that's kind of an idea that you could start to potentially implement if procrastination is an issue. Now, maybe the biggest of all with this is to commit to small steps with academic work. So, a few pointers on this. Commit to starting, not finishing schoolwork. Okay, and this goes for perfectionism as well. It's just think about starting. What is the next step, rather than finishing huge blocks of study. So rather than the young person saying, I'm going to do 4 hours study tonight, I'm just going to start study and continue, predict breaks, and then continue to just focus on starting small achievable steps. So we want to avoid overwhelm at all costs, because overwhelm is really the thing that's driving procrastination. So aim for consistent, doable daily steps. Be consistent with an easy baseline. So this is something you can talk about with the teenager in your life. You can just really have an honest conversation with them and say, look, how much are you studying on average? And just don't say, okay, look, that's not enough. say, look, we're going to be honest about it, we're going to assess where we are, and we're going to try and implement maybe some improvement on that. Okay, so we don't want to scare the nervous system, put too much on it. We want to just have a consistent baseline for daily consistent action. Now, the young person has this baseline, they're taking regular, consistent, small steps. Occasionally they can go beyond that then. Anything that's added to that is seen as a bonus. The issue really I'm talking about here is this idea of making big promises, committing to doing huge chunks of study. Of course, the more study the person does, the more likely they are to do better in the exam. We all are aware of that. But this is really about assessing where we are and how we can improve from where we are towards that goal. And making big promises and breaking big promises leads to feelings of guilt and lack of confidence and low self-esteem. So think about it. If the young person is constantly saying, look, I'm going to do 4 hours tonight, and maybe they're only doing a tiny bit of study or homework, they're going to feel guilt as a result of that. So if we sort of proactively start off with just the goal of, okay, continually just focus on starting and see where we end up at the end of the day, that's a much healthier way to do it. It's going to avoid those feelings of guilt, and it's going to avoid affecting the self-esteem of the young person. So that's another big step in this, another big one. So those are 3 of the really big ones we have. Now, 3 of the big tips. Very briefly, I'd just like to address a few questions that were sent in for this talk here on procrastination, because so many people really have this issue. There's some studies on this have been done, and they show as many as 70% of young people have an issue with procrastination. So this question starts, it says, hi, Dr. David. My son, 16 years old, has stopped doing his homework, and he says he has missed so much work now that there's no point. Any advice would be very welcome. Thank you. So to address this question, very common question, there is a psychologist, his name is Martin Seligman, and he developed this idea of learned helplessness. So learned helplessness, it is, if all you know is negative experiences, you will give up and accept whatever situation you're in. So if this 16-year-old, if this person has stopped working entirely right now, and they've got to the point where they're saying, look, there's no point, really what we're looking for is just an alternative strategy with this, because whatever they've been trying in the past up to now has probably led them to feel disappointed, and their confidence has been shook with this. Maybe they're not feeling so good in terms of self-esteem. So really, a few of those pointers I mentioned, those 3, which is to only commit to small, consistent steps. Focus on starting and not finishing. Okay? Look at scheduling in and guaranteeing recreational time, and be much more proactive with the recreational time. And then to look at some of that language. It's a much different approach, I would imagine, for most people, because most people have this sort of much more sort of structured approach to planning, for instance, that actually makes them more prone to procrastinate. So I'd like you to just consider implementing some of those strategies there, but this is a very common issue. If they're feeling that hopelessness, it's because they've been trying something for a long time and they've consistently ran into trouble with it. So it's time for to tweak the approach that's been taken, and I hope that's really going to help there with that one. So another question we have here to finish up with was a question, and it starts off, it says, hi, my son is in first year and is okay in class but struggling with homework and keeps saying he'll do it later. Yes, that's the maximum, I guess, of the procrastinator. I'll do it later. He was fine in primary school, but finding it hard to concentrate now, and it takes ages for him to complete homework. So if it's taken ages, there's this thing called Parkinson's law, and Parkinson's law is this thing of work expands to fill the time allotted for it. So in other words, if young people keep telling themselves, I have all day, I have all night to do it, they tend to drag it out forever, and it's this really unhelpful approach. So I know it's the pandemic situation, but I don't want him to off to a bad start and developing bad habits that will stay with him. Any ideas how I can help? So this is again, it's a situation of, it's things are being drawn out and losing focus, and it's this thing of, again, usually the issues that are driving procrastination are the same. Okay, so we want to kind of challenge this idea that we have this long period of time to do it, and also change the motivation from extrinsic motivation to intrinsic motivation. So to start encouraging this person to see this as the choice that they're making proactively, okay? Rather than I have to do it, I choose to do it, to make choices, but to make small choices, to make consistent, doable choices. And really, when we sit down and we actually start to look at how much time we have available to do any of this study work or school work, we don't really have all the time that we think we do. So that can be a useful thing to point out, is that we don't have that much time. So let's start to look at safeguarding recreational time and then putting in study also with that. And that will probably be a big help in this. So I hope that's helpful there. And I hope some of those points that I've given earlier will be places where you can start to think about maybe implementing some change in this. It's a great idea that you do start to put in place good study strategies because, as I've noted, that this issue of procrastination tends to get worse, for instance, in university. And I know this student is in first year, and that seems like a million years away. But it can be great to get the strategy right now. So, with that said, I'd like to thank you sincerely for joining me here in this talk about procrastination, academic procrastination. And if you have any questions, feel free, you can email me. My email is there. And also, there are resources available that will help with academic procrastination on my website, which you can also see there as well. So thanks again for watching, and all the best. Take care.